who's very popular on UK television. Now, Jeff and I both were invited to do a talk at the National Theatre in London about 3 years ago. And we met up for coffee at Manchester University a week or two before we were due for the event. And again, Jeff turned round to me over coffee and said, of course, we know that every electron in the universe knows the location of every other electron. So yet again, this is actual observed science. You know, this is something that is observed, but we're interpreting it in a different way. Now, if it means that every particle in the universe is in fact related to every other particle, it means that the way we perceive reality with distance, because of course one of the great mysteries is space. You know, if there was nothing in space, as Ernest Mach said, if there was nothing in space, would space exist? You know, think about this again. The universe exists because there are objects in it. If there were no objects in the universe, space is literally empty. So if there were no objects, say there were only 2 objects in the universe, 2 planets, one of them ceases to exist, the universe would then shrink to that single planet. And if that disappeared, nothing would exist.
But that doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it's one of these things, again, that if you talk to scientists about the mystery of space, the idea is the distance between particles or the distance between objects. Is it a distance in time or is it a distance in space? Because, of course, space and time are related. And if space and time are the same thing, which, of course, Einstein said they were, you take time out of the equation or space out of the equation, what do you end up with? You end up with this kind of emptiness, this darkness. Now, the latest research is suggesting this 0-point energy is the energy that exists within the vacuum. And indeed, it was first discovered or first suggested back around about 1947 when a Dutch physicist called Casimir noticed that if you place two metal plates inside a vacuum tube, even though there's a vacuum in there, the 2 plates seem to be pushed together. And he came to the conclusion that there's a form of energy that exists within the vacuum of space itself. Now, this energy, if it exists, I believe, is what the Hindus call the Akashic record, the Akashic field. It is the information field. It's what creates everything. It is where thought comes from. It creates the illusion around us using holograms and using holographic techniques. In other words, reality that we see around us is non-physical. Everything is non-physical.
And therefore, this also explains the idea that everything is in all-knowing. It's in constant communication with itself in that sense, and hence we also actually have some kind of verification here for some of the more paranormal sciences perhaps as well. I mean, Rupert Sheldrake talked about the morphogenetic fields. There are people who are talking about the fact that they are in communication telepathically with other people, with even other beings, Anthony.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, there was something very curious happened to me last weekend. I was invited to be a speaker at a place called the Arthur Findlay College near Stansted Airport. And I was invited along. It was a week-long discussion between scientists and mediums, and medium people. And one of my friends, Susan Laybourne, was giving a series of talks, and she invited me along to one of them before I did my major presentation. And she asked me to stand up, and there were a group of about 15 people in the room. And she said, now what you need to do is imagine that there is somebody on your shoulder trying to communicate with you. And then she said, let your mind go blank and just let the ideas flow into your mind. Now, I'd say that by making my mind go blank, I could be attuning into the 0-point field, the 0-point energy, because what you do is you go into this kind of quasi-hypnagogic state, and you start to draw up information from somewhere. Now, much to my surprise, and it did stun me because this has never happened to me before, I had certain images come into my mind. And one particular image was of a schoolgirl being hit on the back of the neck. And we had a person in the audience who was a school teacher. And Susan then turned around to me. She said, think about something significant about our school teacher friend over here, something you can attune into. And immediately in my mind, I had a vision of a kitchen being renovated, and the kitchen, the doors on the kitchen units were off. In other words, it was really quite a curious view that the doors went on the kitchen units. And this is what I announced. And the woman was stunned, as I was, because apparently that was literally what was happening at that time at her home, where she was having a new kitchen put in. Now, there is no possible way I could have known that. And yet somehow I picked that up.
This is remote viewing that you're talking about right here.
Almost. Whether it was remote viewing, whether it was some form of telepathy, whether I'd picked up the thoughts within her mind, or was it sheer coincidence? But to me, to say that is a coincidence is really begging massive questions.
Yeah.
You know, why would I think about something so obscure? And it did surprise me, because I then came to the conclusion that really what is happening with mediums is that they are attuning in, some of them, into this Akashic field and Akashic record. And when I did my presentation to all the representatives at the conference, and we had people from the Netherlands, we had people from Denmark, we had people from Germany, and I very much put it, you know, my Damon Eidolon idea, and the idea that we all have a higher self that has lived this life before. And I was suggesting to the mediums that their spirit guides are in fact their self, their daemon. And I was expecting them all to be very, very upset about this. They weren't. It was incredible, the amount of that they came over to me and they said, do you know, I've spent most of my life trying to understand what is happening, and you've explained it in 2 hours. So clearly there is a deeper well of information. Could this explain, for instance, hypnotic regression? You know, when people seemingly attune into past lives, is it that they are really living or remembering a life that they have lived? Or is there out there a huge record of information? You know, it's very much what Tom Campbell would argue, that there is an informational field out there, and we attune into it. You know, it's again what Jung would consider to be the collective unconscious. And we attune into this. And our brain, when they are in certain brain states, the brain can attune into this and pick this information up and pull it up through the neurons of the brain and manifest within our mind.
This is fascinating. There's a couple of things I want to ask you pertaining to this. When we talk about the 0-point field or 0-point energy, there's a lot of people obviously working with this idea of how also we, mankind, can tap into this to utilize and solve some of our energy crisis and so forth. But do you think our understanding of this is vital to be able to pull this off? In other words, we need to have a realization perhaps about how this works before we en masse, if we will, could begin to tap into this field, if that is even doable or even suggestible. But because it's almost like something needs to give way. We're walking around the subject matter. We can kind of understand that it's there, but no one really knows how to get to it, if you will, Anthony.
No, absolutely. That is the major issue at the moment, is that theoretically the 0-point field exists. The question is how we draw this energy up. And of course, the major problem is it's called a 0-point field because it exists, and the energy manifests itself within the vacuum of space, and in fact at absolute zero. You know, 272 point whatever it is degrees Kelvin. So the problem would be is that it can only manifest at these very, very low temperatures. But on top of that, I am aware that there is a firm in Boulder, Colorado that have received an American patent to start developing ways by which we can draw this information, this energy, for want of a better term, up. But if this energy is in fact the ground energy force of everything that is and everything that's manifest, we're looking in the wrong way, because if this energy is somehow linked to consciousness and that we are like waves on this huge ocean of 0-point energy, the energy we can use effectively because we manipulate our own reality. And in which case, if we can create the energy ourselves, we can manifest it. Now, I'm not somebody that is a great believer in the idea of, thinking things and they will happen, and you want to be a millionaire. So if you think very, very hard,
right,
this will all come to you. I mean, that's not something I believe in. But that is extrapolating from very much the Copenhagen interpretation of particle physics, that particles are waves until they're observed. And when they're not observed, they are waves. Now, again, people turn around to me and say, no, that cannot be real. But effectively it is, as you're probably aware, that if you fire a stream of light or a stream of any form of electromagnetic energy through two parallel slits, if you fire them and you don't have a detecting device on the slits, it continues to be a wave, goes through the two slits as a wave, and then gives a wave pattern, as you would expect with a wave on a board or a sensor at the other side.
That's a good idea, but how do we know that if we don't have a detector there to measure that?
Well, what happens is quite simple. What they do is they peep. So what they did was they literally placed a measuring device on one or other of the slits. And when they did that, the wave became a series of particles. And the wave and the interference pattern on the back of the wall ceased to be an interference pattern and became two bands of light.
Yep.
When they take the measuring device away, it goes back to being a wave. Now, this is stunning. And I don't think a lot of people it's really dawned on people exactly what this means.
Yeah, you're right.
And again, it's what Bruce Rosenberg says in his book. So just to talk it through again. So you have a stream of electromagnetic energy. You fire it through two slits. If you do not have a measuring device on the slits, it goes through as a wave, and it proves it's a wave because you get an interference pattern on the back wall or on the measuring device. If, however, you place a measuring device of any description on one or other of or both of the slits, the wave has to choose to go through one or other of the slits, and it does. It is observed to go through one or the other of the slits, which means it's a particle. And when it does that, it gives a totally different pattern on the back wall or on the measuring device at the back. And it does this consistently. So it means if the particles know they're being observed, they react because they know they're being looked at. Now, when people turn around to me and say, oh, well, it's electromagnetic waves. Well, that's what light is. But what is more intriguing is they have reproduced these experiments with molecules, very large molecules. In fact, a buckyball, I think, has somewhere in the region of 64 atoms in it. And buckyballs do exactly the same thing. When they're observed, they go through as a wave. When they're unobserved, they go through as a wave. But when they don't, they go through as particles. Now, this means that the observed universe is observed and is physically present in three-dimensional space because it is observed or measured. If there were no sentient beings and no measuring devices in the universe, there would be nothing here. Now, that's intriguing.
That's very intriguing.
Yeah. There would be electromagnetic energy, but it wouldn't coalesce into particles.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it could be I have grossly misunderstood that, but this is how I understand it to be, and every book I've read on the subject very much reinforces this model. And it is the materialist reductionists that are deliberately ignoring the implications of the twin slit experiment.
Now, what about the quality, if you will, of the consciousness that is doing the observing as well? Because if we go back to the concept that you mentioned earlier here, hypnagogia, fascinating idea. I think actually I had a whiff of that yesterday, last night, by the way. But what is happening in the brain? Why is it that when we're in this twilight zone, if you will, between waking and sleeping, that we can tap into or lift the veil to reality in one sense, and not when we're in our regular state, and you know, going on from there then as well, maybe we can talk about how observed